Welcome to Rings and Things, where we discuss Tolkien adaptations and texts.
We're just two hobbits from the Shire, one bringing the other along on this adventure.
I'm your host, Agnes, and this is my co-host,
Recurring guest star,
JD. Today we're covering the second half of The Return of the King. We're wrapping up the entire original trilogy.
Yes, this is a bookend for bookends. Probably the biggest bookend that we're going to be... I mean, there's going to be other pretty big... maybe when you get to literal books, those will be bigger bookends. I'm not sure.
The second half of the movie opens, and what was your first reactions?
The first scene, and I think I stopped at the same point as you, where I picked up was Aragorn assaulting a naval convoy to the battle. And it starts off, you're not sure what he's doing, and maybe because we split this up, but I honestly thought he was going to either use diplomacy here or just him, Legolas, and Gimli were about to take on the entire boat. But I completely forgot about the legions of undead and did not expect them to just pop up and swarm the sailors in that moment.
So when you were watching this, did you recognize any sense of eucatastrophe in this scene? Did that thought cross your mind at all?
I didn't specifically think of the word eucatastrophe, but I was kind of just into the movie. I wasn't using my critical mind yet. I was warming up still. But I see how it applies, definitely. What
about at the Battle of the Pelennor Fields when Aragorn shows up? Did eucatastrophe occur to you there at all?
Yes.
Okay. The method of eucatastrophe is different in the books, and this is a change that bothers a lot of people. It never really bothered me how they changed the eucatastrophic moment. We'll be able to look at this more critically when we have the book version in front of us as well.
Right. Curious how the books handle it different. We'll have to see that soon.
Long story short, the army of the dead helps scare off all the bad guys from the boats, and there's still a bunch of sailors on the boats who have been enslaved by the evil men, and Aragorn offers them a chance to switch sides, because realistically, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli can't actually sail a fleet of ships by themselves.
Yeah.
So all of these men switch sides, sail the boats over, and the army of the dead is released from their oath for getting the boats. They never actually show up at the Pelennor Fields.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm very excited to read the books and see how the different things hit me, but I thought the army of undead at Pelennor Fields was at least visually very interesting.
Even one undead would win the war.
Yeah, if depending on how undead work, probably, yeah. I didn't see any of them fall. I don't know if you could kill them.
How can you kill the dead?
Doesn't seem very possible. Yeah, but I did like that. It cuts to Sam. He's very distraught, and he's heading back, and he finds the lembas bread that Sméagol had disposed of off the cliff, and I don't get, and well, I mean, you did explain to me that it was movie exclusive with the bread, but Sam finding it and convincing him to turn back makes no sense whatsoever, because he knew that he hadn't eaten the bread. It's not like he was convinced he did, and that Sméagol must have disposed of it.
You're completely right, and I can't say that I've ever thought of it that way, but once you pointed it out, you're right. I have no idea what must be going through Sam's mind at that point. My objection had always been that Sam would never turn around and go home, because he'd come this far with Frodo. He's not going to abandon him now. But you're right. Finding the bread doesn't really change anything, except that now he has some of the lost stores. Maybe if he'd muttered a comment to himself about how I'm going to go find the bread that Gollum lost and then come back, but he doesn't do anything like that. And I mean, he crushes the bread in his fingers.
Shot in the dark here. He's now I have proof I didn't eat the bread, but that could just be denied so easily. If Sméagol were there, he could say he just hid some of it too and ate the rest of it. It doesn't really vindicate him. It doesn't prove anything. He already knew it, and it's not evidence that he could use to sway anybody's opinion anyway. And maybe I don't know if I would have caught on to that if I didn't know that Sam leaving was a movie adaptation and not in there. I don't know if I would have been thinking critically about it. that's kind of one thing that, like, slowing down, discussing it and discussing some of the differences has given me, I don't know, it didn't, like, it's not a movie breaking scene, but it's just like eyebrow raising. Like, okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The following scene, briefly, Sméagol betrays Frodo, leads him to a giant spider.
Shelob.
Shelob is recoiling from it's a magical artifact that he acquired from Galadriel, I believe.
This was Frodo's gift from Galadriel. It's called the Phial of Galadriel. And when Galadriel gives it to Frodo, she says, "I give you the light of Eärendil, our most beloved star." There's a lot to unpack here. But long story short, Eärendil was a guy who became a star.
Dang.
And this light is extra awesome because of that. Not only is this spider, like all evil things, not liking light and goodness, but this particular flashlight packs a punch.
It definitely was something I didn't understand the purpose of the magic item, but it felt like it was a magical artifact effect more than just light sensitivity when I was watching it.
Definitely, yeah.
I do want to mention this because I try not to read much about the movies before we discuss them, but I read the Battle of Helm's Deep. Somebody questioned Peter Jackson on where all the lighting's coming from, and he said, I guess the same place the soundtrack is, I suppose. And I also in this scene, you notice it too, I very much like the choice to make the environment seem dark, but not actually making it hard to see as a viewer. That's very annoying when movies make it just hard to see what's on the screen.
Yeah, definitely. And I like the answer of the same place as the soundtrack, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, that's not a direct quote, but it was something to that effect, yes.
It's light and sound for the audience benefit, not for the benefit of the characters.
Yeah, and it's not an accurate representation. It just makes it a cinematic, enjoyable experience for the audience, exactly.
Yeah.
So he does escape Shelob and run back into Gollum. He fights him off, throws him off a cliff. Before he does mention he has to destroy it for both our sakes, he's very empathetic to Gollum, even though he just betrayed him. I really like that from Frodo.
It's a good example of the pity and mercy themes.
Yeah, I really like that theme. It really does. It's a very interesting dynamic between Frodo and Gollum. I know in the movie you said it's different. He's a little bit more antagonistic or at least distrustful. But the empathy and sympathy he feels for Gollum, which again is like just such a wretched creature, I really enjoy. To me, it's a good way for the movie to show how much the ring is weighing on him, that this evil and mean and ugly creature, especially now, very evil. Not just like if he was just ugly but nice, that's not a good reason to hate him. But on a visceral level, something just isn't right with him because of the ring. He still relates to it because he's carrying the ring and he knows he held it much longer than he did. And that dynamic was really good, I thought, throughout this whole trilogy. The
thing that I noticed in this scene is that no one ever really talks about Gollum just randomly surviving a fall from a ginormous height. Because, spoiler, Gollum actually isn't dead.
I feel like he's done that a couple times.
Fallen from a height?
Yeah, I feel like, man, I definitely remember him falling from what seemed higher than, 15, 20 feet, which, if he's just a guy now, he shouldn't really be walking afterwards.
I can't recall any falls that he takes of epic proportions. This is like an Emperor Palpatine type fall that he just pops back from.
Yeah. No, the other times you did see how far it was, where this one it was like it looked like a bottomless pit.
Yeah.
The other ones, though, I swear there's more than one time in the mountain climbing scenes where he gets knocked down pretty good. But yeah, this one is next level. It looks like he falls we can't tell, but easily hundreds of feet down a mountain, and it's just fine.
Well, this particular fall surviving is the consequence of the change with Frodo, Sam, and Gollum with the Lembas bread. It's one of the changes that ends up being almost necessary to compensate for the changes that were made earlier to get them back on track where everyone needs to be. I don't know that any of these changes were worth the cost that it made.
A lot of the stuff that you mentioned were changes. They do seem questionable. I'm holding out hope until I read the book. If the plot line with Sam and Frodo splitting and all of that just to be sewn up and fixed like so quickly and really in the runtime, I think it's like the end of last movie to the very beginning of this movie. It's not a very long period of tension. I don't know. So it does seem odd to me.
One of the things I took note of was that the book material for the Two Towers ends at timestamp 229, where Frodo is being taken by the orcs. And the Return of the King material for Frodo and Sam doesn't actually start until 2 hours and 57 minutes when Frodo is waking up in the tower. We're 3 hours into Return of the King before we start Return of the King material.
Oh my goodness. Is that just with Frodo and Sam, or is that on both sides?
No, the other characters start Return of the King material sooner.
Right away. Oh, wow.
Not right away, but sooner. So, speaking of the other characters...
Throughout the films, and I haven't commented on this, but Merry and Éowyn are compared a lot in the scenes with the armies, and there's some other ones. They're portrayed as people willing to fight despite being told not to because they're not as physically strong as Éowyn a man and Merry man in the other sense of the word. Éowyn is a trained warrior and has slightly less muscle mass, but Merry is untrained and also half a man's height. I feel like the comparison feels a little bit unfair to Éowyn.
The bigger problem with Éowyn fighting in the books is that she's been charged with running the country while everyone's away. And who's running the country if she's off fighting?
Yeah, I guess she had a job to do. That was not mentioned in the movies that I remember at all.
It wasn't made a big point of, no.
Yeah.
The movie moves the argument more about her sex rather than her job.
Which, I don't know, was like, to me, a little bit odd. I know this is like, now it's a 20-year-old movie, and that was a bigger theme in a lot of things, but I just felt like it was odd. It definitely would feel out of place if it came out today, that choice.
Yeah.
Although if they're trying to make a historical example, I'm sure like that did happen in different societies all throughout history too. So it's not like it's necessarily good. I just feel like it would be played different nowadays.
Different societies had a lot of different roles for women and gender stereotypes.
Yes, definitely. And then so after that it cuts to Denethor. He's walking around with Faramir's dead body. He's unable to function because his sons are dead, which is fair in a way on a personal level. But I feel like he's royalty, so he decides he has to bring like at least 20 to 30 guys with him to help him mope like during a siege. I feel like is next level self-defeat and wallowing. It was really pathetically sad to see.
I laughed so hard when I read this note of yours. It was so funny to me.
Yeah, like if it was just him in the room crying, even though that's not the right thing to do, it's human and relatable, but it's another thing, like I said, all of those guys following him around I thought was a little ridiculous. And he yells at them to get him, the pyre materials and stuff like that in the middle of a siege. I don't know.
I mean, that's really self-defeating when you're going to immolate yourself.
Yeah, that's true.
Next, we cuts to
Frodo waking up. No, not yet. He's unconscious and Sam is saving him, right?
Gollum falls. It cuts away. Frodo. We rejoin Frodo walking alone, wishing Sam was with him, and then Shelob catches up to him and stabs him.
I did note that Frodo getting stabbed by Shelob, the spider monster, that it was reminiscent of the Nazgul injury. Just like the way it was cut. He was stabbed in the chest and cuts to him like making a face and falling and it looking like a damaging wound. I don't really like have too much to say here besides Frodo's like he's really damaged along this journey.
Yeah, neither wound really heals.
He has the artifact from Galadriel. That's apparently a star. What's that called?
The Phial of Galadriel.
The Phial of Galadriel. Phial. And he also has his sword. He's ready to fight. He's shouting out one-liners. Like he doesn't seem like the quiet little Sam that he lets off when it, what's the saying? Like road meets the metal, something like that. When his courage is tested, he has it, you know.
He's Samwise the Brave.
Yeah, and so he does. He scares off Shelob, right? He doesn't slay Shelob.
He stabs Shelob, or rather, Shelob skewers herself on his sword, and she crawls away into a hole. And what becomes of her is no tale tells, is what the book says. Whether she died of her wounds or nursed them into healing, she never pops up again in another tale.
That sounds like prime sequel bait.
You can write one.
The journey of Shelob after everything's okay.
When I was watching the movie this time, one of the things I noticed was that Mordor seems very small compared to what it is in the book. Mordor is an entire country. But when they're looking out over Mordor, it seems like you can see across it.
Right. So, okay, I thought they were already in Mordor, but they were not yet when they were looking across. I thought that was just like the center of Mordor.
No, they're on the edge.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, that is it looks like a medium-sized city then, maybe?
Yeah. It looks more like a medium-sized city than an entire country. They have a lot farther to walk in the book than the movie lets on.
I'm sure Peter Jackson just was like, the runtime's enough. Let's make this a very, very small micronation.
Oh, I'm not being critical of it. It was just something I never had really observed before, was the difference in scale.
Like I said, I thought they were on like maybe the outer edge of Mordor, and this was the center capital city that they just now were entering. New York, the state, versus New York, the city, something like that.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah. And at this point, Frodo and Sam must think that Gollum must be dead.
Yeah, as we mentioned earlier, that was quite the fall.
In the book, Frodo and Sam know that Gollum is still alive.
Okay, that's interesting. So, do they... And maybe I'll wait till read the book, but I'm curious to see when I do read the book when exactly the three split then.
Sam and Gollum have a fight while Frodo is getting stabbed by Shelob. Okay,
and then...
Gollum gets away, and... they know that Gollum must be lurking around somewhere.
That makes a lot of sense then. Yeah, that's interesting too, because it does kind of make the journey to the last leg here a little bit more daunting in the book. Like, if they probably feel like they don't have to watch their backs as much, thinking Gollum is dead. At least one less threat to worry about.
Yeah, and they're definitely watching their backs in the book. So, I don't like the scene where Frodo flops out of the eye's laser vision, but... like you've done in the past, to try to give the best spin to these kind of scenes, I was trying to think of what kind of good spin could I give this, and I think I came up with something. I suppose that this can be an example of what I'll call visual eucatastrophe, that the stone that he flopped behind just happened to be big enough to hide him when he flopped.
Yeah.
And since you're turning a story from a literary medium to a visual medium, seeing that visual eucatastrophe happen is the best justification I can give to this scene that I otherwise don't like.
That's pretty stretched thin, but I always like trying to give a good read to something that I don't initially off the bat get. I didn't note anything about it, but I did think that also was like a little bit, I don't know, maybe corny is a good word for it. Him falling out of the laser eye vision last minute, but maybe, yeah, one man's corny is another person's intense and last minute saved you catastrophe.
Maybe this scene really moves someone, and that's great. Not my scene though. This was still the best spin I could give on this scene though.
If you weren't trying to give it the best spin, like, what's your you just don't like the visuals of the scene? It just didn't look good to you? Or was there more to it that you didn't like?
Sauron isn't an eye on top of a tower with laser vision.
He's just a guy.
He's just a guy in a tower, missing a ring. Very powerful guy. Very scary guy. Has no compunction against, doing bad things to you. But he's not an eye on top of a tower with laser vision that you gotta flop out of the sight of.
He was definitely in view of the eye is the thing,
Yeah, the eye saw him.
Yeah, okay. I don't know. I don't know much beyond that scene, but I do like that spin is way better than anything I could have gave it. It's just it is a little bit confusing though, and it does cut back again to Pelennor Fields is the location of this battle, I have to keep scrolling up to your note about it. I just and it's outside the city. Minas Tirith is the name of the city.
Yes.
Right, I'm catching on.
It'll be easier when you're reading it in a book.
Yeah, that's very true. So it is cutting back to this now. I really like this battle too. I love large battle scenes, as I know I've mentioned. Yeah, so they have a few moments beforehand. It shows a little bit more on the inside the city reactions. I think this scene Gandalf is kind of showing himself as the leader since Denethor's gone. Which I like seeing him kind of taking charge and getting his hands dirty, so to speak. At least for a wizard, I always picture wizard as far up in a way, not right on the front line. And the very first scene where they charge in with the orcs is very good for showing why horses are terrifying. Like even the orcs were scared. How much mass and moments. Like I don't know why I feel like I have to justify this. Maybe just because not a lot of people understand, but like horses are scary when they're used as a weapon.
And what's even scarier is an enemy who has nothing to lose. When your enemy is screaming death,
yeah,
it's that's going to be terrifying.
Yeah, that's true.
The death charge never fails to move me.
It was great. It was a great scene. Definitely the build up, the tension. I don't know. If I had to pick like a favorite faction, the Riders of Rohan are really cool people. Like the movie does makes it kind of an easy choice, I guess. They're just, for lack of a better word, awesome. Like just watching them go into battle was really cool.
Definitely.
Okay, so it cuts back to inside. Denethor is on the pyre, pouring oil over himself with Faramir. Pippin comes back, right, and tells everybody that Faramir lives and is trying to stop them from burning his unconscious body. Denethor is in too much of despair to listen to reason, releases him from his oath, throws him out, locks him out, ends up burning alive, basically, and Faramir wakes up and escapes, and Denethor lives just long enough to see that his son lives. I feel like, and I don't know if this is book and movie, but Denethor's death of an ever-growing and ever-progressing flame, and is a metaphor on how panic and despair grows in like a positive feedback loop and becomes unstoppable when you feed into it.
I think that this is an interpretation with merit. Who knows what Tolkien may or may not have intended, but Denethor's despair has been mounting for a while,
right? And
it's becoming more and more consuming, like you note, and finally it is his despair that just burns him out. This is the worst case of work burnout.
Yeah.
Literally.
Very burnt out. Oh my god. There's a lot of battle scenes going on. The Witch King, he had to leave from Gandalf. Why was that?
Because he heard the Riders of Rohan arriving.
Okay, so he was about to fight Gandalf, which he mentioned would have been like that would have been death for him, or could have been death for him. It was dangerous for him, at least.
Definitely dangerous. The movie portrays the Witch King as more powerful over Gandalf than he would have been in the books. Shattering the staff is a common complaint, one which I sympathize with.
Yeah, that was pretty scary, though, I will say. If I could see if that's a movie edition, it's definitely a power scale that might seem a little bit unjustified.
It's an unjustified power scale, basically, yeah.
And so he turns out to the battlefield to assist with fighting the Rohinians? Rohirrim. He turns out to the battlefield to help fight the Rohirrim. He ends up in a fight and knocking Theoden down, I believe.
Yes, his fell beast targets Theoden's horse, and Theoden gets crushed under his horse.
Yes.
Right as the Witch King is coming in for the death kill, then Éowyn shows up.
Yes, Éowyn shows up, has an intense fight. I will say the Witch King having a flail was pretty cool, too. I like that. It definitely made her plate armor look like it wasn't going to do very much. She does get hit pretty bad in the arm, and then when all seems lost, she's about to fall. Merry, and I always pause here because I don't want to mix up Merry and Pippin because they look so similar, but I know they're completely, like, I like both of their character developments and how they're separate, but it's Merry on the ground, right? And
correct, Merry.
So Merry comes up and saves her last minute. Well, okay, so he wounds the Witch King, which allows her to save herself, might be a better way to put it. She stands up and he confidently says, "No man can kill me." This is right before Merry stabs him, though, right?
Right. The Witch King says, "No man can kill me." Merry stabs the Witch King in the back of his knee, and he falls to his knees, and then Éowyn takes the opportunity to swipe in and steal the kill. Merry just gets an assist.
Yes, and then the I am no man, which I did hear reference before, but that is such a fun, like, it feels like, again, like, if Tolkien put that in the book, I wouldn't be surprised. It feels like it's from an Old English or even classical fable or myth or something.
Actually, that line, precisely how it is a movie line.
Oh, interesting. But is the fact that Éowyn can kill him because she's not a man, she's a woman, part of the book?
Yes, it is.
Okay, yeah, that plot point, I could definitely tell Tolkien. I don't have a direct example, but I could feel, I wouldn't be surprised if that's from some sort of historical myth that he would have studied and wanted to include.
It actually echoes Macbeth.
Right, yeah.
Are you familiar with Macbeth?
I haven't read Macbeth, but I know the basic plot points. My school, we did Hamlet instead.
Macbeth, in the beginning of the story, Macbeth has a prophecy given to him that no man born of woman can kill him. And so he goes around figuring he's invincible because who's a man not born of woman?
Right.
And then I think it's his cousin, don't quote me on this, of the relationship, but there's a guy comes up and he's about to kill him, and it turns out that this guy was born by cesarean, which in their culture was not considered born. It's from his mother's womb, untimely rip.
Right.
So he was not born of woman.
Interesting. That's a good reference. So this part, the next scene, I was a little confused what happened. Éomer finds Éowyn, and I thought she was dead when I was writing these notes.
So did Éomer.
Yeah, and that scene was like heartrending, seeing him find his sister. It was
such good acting.
It might have just been the acting. Yeah, it was great. And then I said she was shown as fine in the last scene. Well,
her shield arm was shattered when the mace hit it, and her sword arm was afflicted by killing the Witch King. When you stab a ringwraith like that, there's a blackness of despair that threatens to overtake her. Merry gets it too. You can kind of see it in the movie when Pippin comes to rescue Merry, and he says, "Are you going to leave me?" And you can kind of get that sense of that black despair that's overtaking him as well. I think the movie was intending to leave you a bit unsure at the scene with Éomer, because Éomer himself thinks she's dead at this point.
It shows much later, though, that she's alive. I feel like the movie was not very clear on this at all.
But when it cuts to the Houses of the Healing later on, you get to see Aragorn doing medicine on her, and Aragorn calls her back.
Yeah, and then also the scene before where she seemed fine before they found her. Like, if they just showed her, like, took another 2 seconds to show her collapsing, would have made that transition better. I just felt very confused. I thought I missed a scene or two, but I don't think I did. It was just very confusing. Not terribly confusing once it's constructed and laid out, but in the moment, it definitely left me scratching my head for a minute.
There's certainly a few loose ends that the movie could have tied up better, but it's already 4.5 hours long.
Yeah, I guess if every time somebody wanted to add 2 seconds to the movie, it would probably be infinitely longer, right?
Maybe we could have cut some stuff from the Two Towers, moved some of the beginning of the Return of the King into the Two Towers, and we'd have had time to discuss this kind of thing. I don't know.
Yeah. And so after they win the battle, I mean, Aragorn comes and he uses the army of the dead basically to mop up. Both sides were giving good hits and punches, but it was uncertain, and he just kind of swept the battlefield clean with like the armies of the dead. They are planning to now take the remaining forces and march to Mordor. They announced, and since this plan is to distract Sauron, they announce it to him using the orb.
The Palantir.
The Palantir. This is the scene also that shows Éowyn alive. Okay, wait, and then I think my notes got out of order here, but I did have a question. They when they march out to the Black Gate, is Faramir with them? I didn't see him there. Did he stay back to administer the city?
Faramir is also in the Houses of the Healing. He's recovering.
Oh, okay.
Because, he did kind of almost get burned alive, and
he was unconscious. Like, I do feel like movies kind of, they downplay that.
He did get shot.
Yeah, he was. They thought he was dead for a reason. That makes sense. So he didn't go out to the battle.
No.
Éowyn, I thought, was also not there, but she just was hanging back She is there with the rest of the crew, though.
Éowyn and Faramir are both in the Houses of the Healing. They actually meet in the Houses of the Healing, and the movie isn't super explicit about this, but it does have a scene where it shows them standing very close together,
Yeah.
representative of the romance that begins to build between them.
Yeah, there was like a little hint there. Well, I didn't know the romance built between them. Is that in the books? Yeah, so there was a little like
There's a nod to it.
a nod, right? Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Even I who didn't know that could tell there was something going on with them talking, you know. As they approach the gates, it then cuts back to Sam and Frodo just right near the end of Mount Doom, like at the mouth of it. The volcano starts erupting. Sam and Frodo both look like they just don't have anything left in the tank, and they're just going like on pure determination. Sean Astin did a great job at giving a heartbroken like look. That really, like, that whole scene just, like, for me really, I don't know, capture Sam and Frodo's whole journey, really. He decides that he's going to carry Frodo at this point because he can't continue on, which I think is one of the best scenes in the whole I said movie, the whole trilogy is Sam deciding to carry Frodo those last few steps, because Sam looks just as beat as Frodo too.
He can't carry it for him, but he can carry him.
Yeah, that one was good. It got me a little choked up. It was a good scene.
It's a great scene.
It cuts back to what's going on at the Black Gate, but Aragorn really had an upgrade. He has a new hairstyle, a new armor. He looks super cool.
He's really accepted his role as leader. Well, remember, Aragorn has this character arc in the movie, and when we're talking about the movies, we can also spend some time talking about the story the movie's telling, not just comparing it to the books we haven't read yet. Aragorn, when he took the sword from Elrond and claimed his kingship over Gondor that allowed him to summon the dead in the first place, the consequence is that now he has really stepped into that role as leader, and this is looking the look in addition to walking the walk and talking the talk.
You could say he looks kingly.
Yeah. It's almost like the king is returning.
I don't remember when he had the outfit change, but I feel like it was after they returned to Minas Tirith and kind of recouped, and then he came back like with the braids and the really cool looking armor.
Yep, which is all after he's accepted that role as leader.
Interesting.
So it was at this point that I was having new thoughts about the literal depiction of an eye on top of Barad-dûr for Sauron. Trying to put the best spin on this, I realized that it helps visually to show how Aragorn's gambit helps Frodo and Sam, because you see the eye literally turning from Frodo and Sam to Aragorn. Like, obviously, the book gets to take much longer to explain all this and do things in a different manner. But in a movie, which is a visual medium, you need visual ways to see this kind of thing. This actually made me feel a lot better about the depiction of a literal eye on top of Barad-dûr, to realize that this really is a difference in medium.
Do you think that if it wasn't for maybe this plot point, that they might have depicted Sauron completely differently in the movie?
Maybe, maybe not. There is a big deal made in the book about the Eye of Sauron, but it's not a flaming eye on top of a tower. It's more like Big Brother.
It's like the invisible hand. It's not a literal hand. It's like just an idea.
It's the idea that Sauron is a micromanager who sees all, but not in a flaming eye sort of way. It's in a, I have spies everywhere, and I have a Palantir, and he's got lots of tools at his disposal to be really powerful and know a lot about what's going on without being a flaming eye on top of the tower. But these kinds of things are harder to show in a movie, especially if you're not going to show Sauron in the tower.
I do think that having the Eye of Sauron not being a literal eye is pretty good. I like that. And I can see why a lot of people did like the literal eye then. The
Eye of Sauron is kind of like the hand of Saruman. Like, Saruman's got that white hand emblem. The Eye of Sauron is kind of that same thing, but he's got a red eye instead of a white hand.
They should have made Saruman a giant hand.
So, fun fact, the place where they filmed the Battle of the Black Gate was literally a minefield.
Oh my god.
It was the only place in New Zealand barren enough to be Mordor. They had to be careful not to set off any mines during filming. The actors literally had to dodge mines.
That's method acting, I think. Probably got him in a good headspace.
Hey, it was some life and death going on right there.
I'm curious. I'm. If you don't know already, I'm gonna look it up soon. Why there's a minefield in New Zealand?
It's where the army did their testing.
Oh, okay. Weapon testing field. Okay.
Yeah, it was a weapons testing field, and I think it's really fitting that Mordor was represented by a place where they test things designed to destroy life in war.
Especially like testing stuff made on an industrial level.
It's almost like there's a message here or something.
Right. I do think Saruman was more representative of industrial themes that Tolkien was hammering on than Sauron. But I might have just not been focusing at the right times for Sauron. I felt like Sauron felt like more of a traditional older evil, and Saruman was more interested in finding new ways to be evil.
I think that's very true. I think you can read the industrial themes into Sauron as well, but it's definitely more prominent with Saruman. Sauron is the evil that is control and lack of freedom, and Saruman is the evil that is industrialization.
Yeah, that makes sense. They definitely both have aspects of the each other's emblematic thing. Like Saruman's definitely into controlling his technology and industrialization and apparatus.
For sure.
And Sauron's definitely into using, well, I don't know as much if it's in the movie. Definitely I can't think of an example where it's like, oh, Sauron is a metaphor for industrialization in one way or the other.
Well, how about Grond?
Right, yeah, that's a good one. It's right there.
Sauron invents this awesome battering ram and then sends it out to war. And yeah, I mean, Sauron and Saruman are two sides of the same coin.
It works.
Evil is very uniform.
Yeah.
Evil isn't creative.
That's true. So it cuts back to Sam and Frodo, right?
The next thing you note here is about the eagles.
And that, do they show up at the Black Gate or at all, or is that with Sam and Frodo? That's with Sam and Frodo, right?
The eagles show up at the Black Gate.
Okay, yeah, it kind of all happened pretty quickly. So the eagles show up at the Black Gate and assist them with, fighting the Nazgul have those winged mounts as well.
Right.
And so the eagles help take them out. I know about the eagles because I read The Hobbit in middle school. This is the first time I think they were in Lord of the Rings in a major role, and I feel like it would have been very confusing if I was just picking this movie up completely blind.
The eagle did save Gandalf from the top of the tower.
Oh, right. Yes, I forgot about that, but you're right.
He rescued Gandalf from Isengard. The way the eagle picks up Gandalf is a movie thing. In general, the eagles always herald eucatastrophe. The eagles are designed to be a bit of that help that you can't count on. And that's really what they need at the Black Gate, because this whole gambit is pretty hopeless. It's all just to buy the time that Sam and Frodo need. They need to empty Mordor so that Sam and Frodo can have safe passage. And if they need to die doing it, they're going to do that. And the eagles show up to save their lives.
Yeah, and I remember, and we'll cover this probably pretty soon once we watch the Hobbit films, but the eagles played a major role then too in a similar manner, right? They were pretty like out of nowhere helping Bilbo.
Yep.
So then it does cut back to Sam and Frodo right at the mouth of Mount Doom is how they describe it, right? The mouth of Mount Doom? Or is that just something I can't... Either way, it is the mouth of Mount Doom.
The cracks of Doom?
They're right on the edge. Right there.
Yep.
I feel like the movie, it felt like a callback to Elrond and Isildur, like with Sam and Frodo.
Yep. The positioning definitely...
I liked it.
Calls to mind Elrond and Isildur.
Yeah, it definitely, like, the last time we saw anybody in this location, so to speak, on set here, they were people in the same position who almost make the same choices, too.
Yep. The ring has an anti-destruct mechanism that basically overrides your free will and doesn't allow you to throw it in. Sauron's all about control, like we were saying. Through the ring, he controls you to not throw it in. In the books, Gollum gets the ring back by biting off Frodo's finger like he does in the movie.
Yeah.
But Gollum dances off the edge. He's so happy that he's got the ring that he just is dancing around and he falls off the edge. This is showing Ilúvatar's intervention. Have we mentioned Ilúvatar before?
I don't recall mentioning Ilúvatar at all.
Okay, Ilúvatar is God. It's the name of God.
The only time you may have mentioned that was when Gandalf, and I don't think you mentioned him by name. You called him Gandalf's boss.
Okay, well, Gandalf's boss's intervention, also known as pure chance. Whenever we see luck or chance mentioned in the book, we should be thinking about God, because that's basically how he operates. Because Gollum dancing off the edge is pure chance, this is Ilúvatar's intervention to get the ring destroyed. In the movie, Frodo and Gollum fighting their way off emphasizes evil's penchant for destroying itself. So one of the big themes in the book is that evil will always destroy itself. Evil works against itself. It'll shoot itself in the foot. I see their fight as a way to illustrate that theme instead. Frodo catching the edge feels more like chance. Ilúvatar can be seen in Frodo's chance for redemption after claiming the ring rather than in the fulfillment of the purpose of the story. This change moves the emphasis from the book, but all the themes involved are still important themes. I think this is a very interesting, fertile ground for adaptational discussion because it's not introducing any new themes and it's not contradicting any of the original themes. It's just placing different emphasis in different spots.
To me, hearing the difference between the source and the adaptation, it feels almost like two great ways to tell the story. It reminds me of when the song has like a slightly different line on the album version versus the radio version, and people argue over which is better. But like to me, I feel like this is very like both are very good ways to put it. Gollum dancing off the edge also kind of is evil undoing itself in a way still. And Frodo catching the edge still shows how chance plays a role in it.
For sure.
I think the themes kind of being thrown around and jumbled both make for really interesting like narratives, I feel like.
I like your analogy with the music, not only because music's really important, it also makes me think of like a song versus its remix version.
Yeah.
I feel like that's an apt metaphor here, an apt analogy.
Right.
That we have a song and its remix version, and honestly, I like both of the versions of how the ring gets destroyed. I think they're both very useful to illustrate the different themes.
Some people like remixes of certain songs better.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not implying which one I like better, because I want to read it first before I want to hear the original.
Absolutely. I think the movie missed a great opportunity here, though. Back in the prologue to the Fellowship of the Ring, we see Sauron losing the ring from his right forefinger. But we see Frodo losing it from his left forefinger. They could have easily filmed them losing the same finger, and I really wish they had. The fact that Sauron and Frodo both lose a finger with the ring is supposed to cast them as characters that we view in comparison. And I think...
Right, in the same finger too, right? Just on the opposite side of the hand.
Well...
Forefinger, you said, right?
Right. In the movie, Sauron loses it from his right forefinger, Frodo loses it from his left forefinger, and I think the movie should have made them lose it from the same finger.
That would have made it feel like they're mirroring each other in a way, which I don't know if that makes sense or not. Is there themes that I missed that Frodo is compared to Sauron in any way? Other than they both are related to the ring, I guess.
Pippin calls Frodo the Lord of the Ring at one point in the book.
Oh, man. Honestly, it might have been an interesting theme to put throughout the movie is how the ring affecting Frodo could make him compared to Sauron. But Sauron is such like not really a character. He's a giant eye. He doesn't have much going on as a character like, say, Gandalf does, even though they're both Maiar.
Mm-hmm. I just think it would have been a cool thing for them to lose the same finger.
It would have been pretty cool. I wonder if like the same finger but on the different hand shows how they both dealt with the ring but are different. I don't know. I think it would have been probably cooler if they lost the same finger though, yeah. So the ring is tossed into Mount Doom, and is Sauron dead?
He has been weakened to a point where he can never take physical form again, but his spirit does persist. You can't kill a god.
Yeah. But he'll never take physical form again. So, like, his effect on the realm of men is minimal because they primarily exist in the physical world. Is that right?
Well, he can't take on a physical form anymore.
Yeah.
Like, his spirit is weak. He might be able to do some small-time mischief somewhere, I think. He's not going to become a Dark Lord in a Dark Tower anymore, because basically what he did was he poured a bunch of his power, a bunch of himself, his life force into the ring, and then that was all destroyed. So now he doesn't have that anymore, and now he's too weak to dominate the world.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have a physical form, it makes a lot of things harder that he liked to do.
Yep.
Like amass armies and torture people.
And scare people into submission.
Yeah. So, but he's still around. Interesting. Maybe we can cover this more in the things, but how much of posts or on Lord of the Rings is covered in semi-official ways?
There's some stuff covered in the appendices.
Mm-hmm.
In the end of The Return of the King, and then there's some material that Tolkien worked on after publication as well.
Yeah, it does feel like it's wrapped up though. Doesn't feel like there's much to go from, unless we were talking about the Shelob spinoff. So this scene, Frodo wakes up. It reminded me of being in Rivendell. I asked if that's where we were. Are they all the way back to Rivendell on their way to the Shire?
Nope. Frodo is waking up in Minas Tirith. Because remember, Aragorn is not crowned yet.
Right, that makes sense.
I noticed that there was another missed opportunity. Wouldn't it have been so cool if Aragorn were wearing Boromir's bracers in the Fellowship reunited scene?
Oh, there wasn't any way they really represented Boromir.
So, we didn't particularly note this when we were going through the Fellowship, but there's a small scene where Aragorn takes Boromir's bracers and puts them on himself as kind of like a memorial to his bud, Boromir. I feel like it would have been nice to have that representation of Boromir in the Fellowship reunited scene that we get. And it certainly would be a lot better than, say, seeing a Force Ghost or something there. I just felt like Boromir was missing.
Yeah, a Force Ghost would have been pretty cool. But
no, Boromir doesn't have a ghost in Middle-earth anymore.
No.
That's not how death works.
No. Well, the bracers would have been a good option then. I agree. And so I feel like at this point we enter like an epilogue. I don't know if it's literally an epilogue in the book, but the movie, it's it's wrapping up after the climax of the movie. It's kind of hammered home because it's Frodo's narrating as he's writing a book about the journey.
He's writing The Lord of the Rings.
He's writing The Lord of the Rings. Yeah, he does. I didn't pick out the exact quotes because we're not in Wizard's Wisdom, but he does talk about being unable to pick up his old life. I feel like very apt for trauma and, of course, post-traumatic stress disorder as well, which is from an abundance of trauma. As the journey was very much traumatic.
Absolutely.
Physically as well as emotionally, mentally.
To me, this is one of the moments that makes the story great, whether movie or book, doesn't matter. Frodo's reaction to coming back to the Shire. It's the acknowledgement of the personal cost of experiencing evil.
Right, yeah, that's a good way of putting it. When you think about it from Frodo's perspective, not just, like, the physical trauma was great, and there are wounds that never heal, as we mentioned earlier. I feel like it's kind of psychological, but also, like, spiritual trauma of carrying the ring, in a way. I don't know how that works in Lord of the Rings, but, like, it seems like it wounded him on a level beyond even, like, psychological.
Oh, yeah, he's wounded in every dimension.
Yeah, it's like it was absolutely horrible, and you're right. It is. He had to experience that evil,
and there's a certain innocence that is lost forever, that is irrecoverable.
Mm-hmm.
We set out to save the Shire, Sam, and it was saved, but not for me.
And I feel like Tolkien, in some way, was speaking, or at least maybe venting through Frodo here, possibly.
Now, we're getting into the realm of talking about the author's personal life again. And I'm sure that Tolkien had his share of scars from World War I. And I'm sure he had his share of scars that he never talked about. But anything I know of him seems to show a fairly well-adjusted individual. He had a happy marriage. He had functional children. Maybe he hated fireworks. I have no idea about some of the aspects that might not be recorded in his biography. There is a good book, or a book that I'm told is good, called Tolkien and the Great War, which I have not read, but one day I'll read it.
It'd be a good episode for this podcast.
When I get through it, we can do a special. But Tolkien wouldn't have necessarily had to have experienced all of this personally. He could have also seen the cost of the war on those who suffered even more than he did. He was sent home from the war because of trench fever. Mm-hmm. There were others who didn't get that reprieve. And this represents the personal cost of experiencing evil, like I mentioned before.
Right.
Whether it's in World War I or in the War of the Ring.
Yeah.
Evil is evil, and it's going to carry that cost.
And I might have been jumping the gun a bit by saying Tolkien was personally saying his experience. Maybe it was his friends or something like that. Maybe it's a little bit too easy of a comparison to make. Maybe it's like too easy to apply this to real life because it's World War I, and at the time this was written, World War II at that point were so fresh in everybody's mind. It's definitely something contemporary audiences would have thought. It's definitely something Tolkien would have known people would have thought too. It might have been maybe when he wrote this line is when he wrote that foreword even.
I think it absolutely applies to World War I because I think that this being Frodo's reaction to coming home is generally talking about all experiencing of evil. And the soldiers in World War I were experiencing evil. Therefore, it is applicable there. It applies to the soldiers in World War II who experienced evil. It applies to an individual who experiences something traumatic in personal life in 2024.
Yeah.
Isn't actually out on the battlefield at all. An assault or something like that. Frodo's experience speaks to all personal cost of experiencing evil.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It is a pretty universal line. When you view it through that way. They get on this boat. They go with Elrond and Gandalf, and I know that's where Arwen was going. What does this sailing into the west exactly entail?
So they're going to be sailing to Valinor, which is a place where the elves live with the Valar in light and harmony. It is not heaven.
Boromir's not in Valinor?
Boromir is not in Valinor. The souls of men go whither we know not.
Huh.
Valinor is also known as the Undying Lands, and this is a physical place, but it exists in what I'm going to call another dimension.
Mm-hmm.
So mortals cannot get there. They are called the Undying Lands not because those who go there become undying, but because the undying inhabit those lands. In fact, mortals who make it to the Undying Lands will die even faster than they would otherwise. The joy is too great, and they burn out like flames burning too brightly. Frodo, Bilbo, and later Sam, by virtue of being ring-bearers, are permitted to enter Valinor. Frodo will find his healing there. Remembering my answer from the post last time, I talked about how I theorized that wearing a ring of power gives a mortal an unnatural existence in the spiritual world. I believe that the healing that Frodo, Bilbo, and Sam all receive in Valinor is that they will be relieved of that unnatural spiritual existence before they die, as die they all inevitably will. So when you were talking about the different dimensions as to how Frodo is wounded, he's absolutely spiritually wounded, I think, by having a burdensome spiritual existence.
I noticed, too, you said that it causes mortals to die quicker as opposed to what I presumed, and I imagine a lot of people that if you go there, you don't die. You and then way early you mentioned a theory about how, or maybe this is not a theory and actually just canon, but the ring extends the life of whoever wears it.
That's canon, yeah.
So it seems like the perfect remedy to that, because it stretches it out, spreads you out like butter on a piece of stale bread is the saying?
Like butter spread over too much bread.
Yeah, so this kind of condenses their life back to what it should be, in a way.
That's a great point.
And so that's where Lord of the Rings ends, I believe.
But it's where our things begin.
We're going to jump right into Wizard's Wisdom.
So, pick out a couple of your favorite quotes for me.
This one had a lot. It was a longer movie. I got to be careful here. I'm going to go with number one right off the bat. I had to pick a lot of my favorite quotes are by Sam. Just him saying, "Don't you let go," as Frodo's hanging on to the precipice of Mount Doom. It's a simple quote, but I feel like sometimes those hit harder. The timing, the intensity of how it's said, it beats out the amazing dialogue from his quote at the end of Two Towers, even, for me personally.
That's some high praise. My favorite quote from the movie is Aragorn's speech at the Black Gate. It's very cliche, I know, but I love it. "Men of Rohan, of Gondor, my brothers, I see in your eyes the same fear that would take the heart of me. A day may come when the courage of men fails, when we forsake our friends and break all bonds of fellowship, an hour of wolves and shattered shields, when the age of men comes crashing down. But it is not this day. This day we fight."
Honestly, yeah, that one is pretty good. I did want to do a thing where I compared Theoden's and Aragorn's pre-battle speeches, but there was a lot. Both were just great, is all I could come to. They're both pretty good. They had different vibes, but yeah, I love a pre-battle rousing speech.
Theoden's is largely based on book text. Aragorn's is movie text. Like I've said before, I'm trying to grab movie quotes to talk about here.
Yeah.
And this is a great movie speech.
I do constantly forget that. The fact that that's not in the book, it felt like it's definitely something they could have picked from the book.
A couple things I noticed about this speech was that the mention of an hour of wolves and of shattered shields makes me think of Ragnarok, because in the poetry for Ragnarok, it mentions wolves and shattering shields. It seems a conspicuous allusion there. That
was in Theoden's. The spears will be shaken, shields will be splintered. Is that what you're referring to, or the one that you picked also?
The one that I picked, where it says an hour of wolves and shattered shields.
Oh, right. Okay.
It's the mention of wolves as well.
The wolves is more of the thing. Right. Okay.
It's the wolves and the shields together that makes me think of Norse Ragnarok.
Yeah.
But I mean, they are facing down the end of their world.
Honestly, Tolkien's such a nerd, and I mean that in the best way possible.
Being a nerd's a compliment.
Yes, definitely.
Would you like to pick another quote?
Also at this battle, around the time with Gimli and Legolas, never thought I'd die fighting side by side with an elf. And Gimli responds, what about side by side with a friend? And Gimli again, I could do that. All three of those perfectly could be a favorite quote, so all three of them count as one.
That still only counts as one.
It's all one quote. And that one is also one I knew before watching these movies, but it honestly, once you watch it in context, it's way better than like just knowing it, you know?
For sure. So we have a new segment for you called At the End of All Things. Because we're wrapping up the trilogy, this kind of brings us to a certain completion point. And I want to take a little retrospective look at everything we've done so far, and just kind of talk about some of the big stuff. JD, who's your favorite character?
My favorite character, and I was back and forth between two. I imagine this is not in the top 5 most commonly picked favorite characters. I liked Schmiegel's character / Golem the best.
That is a very unique choice. I like it. What appealed to you about the Gollum Smeagol?
I absolutely, especially in the second movie, the dynamic between the split personality. It's not a great depiction of what actual split personality is like, but it's a fantasy world. It's not the most immersion breaking, but just the dynamic between what he's going to do, the fact that he's sympathetically evil always is nice to me. I always am drawn to characters who are like, he's stuck in a cycle, you know. He made a bad choice and it just ruined his life. And I don't mean I relate to that either, but I could see it happening to somebody, you know?
He's a very relatable evil in some ways.
Right, exactly. He's not Sauron or Saruman, who are just evil for their own sake, for the sake of their power, for the sake of their whatever they believe. He's evil because he's how he survives. So I'm going to pick him as my favorite, and then I feel bad because I had another very close pick, but
Who was your other pick?
Boromir is pretty cool too, which for similar reasons now that I'm talking about it.
My favorite character, I think I'm going to have to go with Frodo today. It changes. I like movie Frodo. I feel like he carries the story really well as the protagonist of the movie. Don't get me wrong, there's lots of other great characters. Some days Pippin's my favorite, some days Faramir's my favorite. Today Frodo happens to be my favorite.
There is, a lot of good characters in all of these movies. It's really pretty interesting how well written a lot of them are and how well rounded they are too.
Who was your least favorite character?
Okay, let me caveat this by saying, if I were in this world, I would have liked him as a person. I feel like his character didn't have that much going. Or do you mean like my least favorite character on like a personal level? Because those are two different answers, and I don't know which one to pick.
We'll talk about them both.
So as a character, as a literary device, I do feel like Gandalf was a little bit poorly written. And I know I love him as like a personality, but as like, he was a very flat character. He has some interesting moments going, but for a lot of times he just feels like, and maybe it's because he's a god on the side of good, but like he doesn't have very much like internal conflict or anything really to look at on that end. I mean, he does. Okay, the only thing that is there is like him feeling worried for Frodo after sending him out on the journey. But other than that, he just feels like somebody who always knows what to do. It doesn't seem to be very fallible, And I don't think an infallible character is always necessarily an interesting one. But as a person, there's a lot of pretty nasty characters, but I feel like Denethor is the worst of the worst. And he's just a nasty mean guy. He has some sympathetic streaks to him, but for me, it's just not doing it like for his son Boromir or Gollum.
Denethor definitely does not win Father of the Year award.
No, he does not. The only time he seems to actually love his son is like when he's on fire.
My least favorite character in the movies is Saruman. Not because he's a bad guy, but because I think the movies do him the dirtiest.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think that Saruman's brand of evil is very subtle and very well represented in the book, whereas it's kind of gotten lost in everything that's going on in the movie. And I'm not saying that the movie, is bad because of it, or that I don't understand why they did what they did, but I feel like a lot of what made Saruman a motivating villain was lost in the movie, and that's disappointing to me.
That's definitely something I've picked up on, even with the very minimal mentions of the differences, especially like before he gets defeated in the Two Towers. A lot of what he does seem like it could have been expanded on more, at very least.
Which movie did you enjoy the most?
I liked, again, I don't know what the consensus is on this. I liked the Two Towers a lot. Every scene in it had me ready for the next one.
Funnily enough, that's my least favorite movie. But that's okay. We can have different tastes.
Yeah, I'm not. It's a hard choice. It's like picking between the three really great pieces of work. But I feel like I liked the Battle of Helm's Deep a lot too. That's what the whole movie was kind of building towards. Sam and Frodo, for the most part, feel like they have an interesting journey. It has the most about Gollum and Smeagol, the most internal conflict with that character, who I liked a lot. I really liked how all the threads kind of were wounding together and coming to a point, which kind of ends with the next movie, right? But I like the anticipation of seeing that happening. I like a lot.
Mm-hmm. What was your least favorite movie?
I hate to say this is a least because I love the movie, but The Fellowship of the Rings was a little bit slower. And it might just simply be because there wasn't a large battle that it's like, okay, I got to pick this one. There is a good battle at the end, but like there's not like anything there. That's not what makes or breaks a good movie. It's still a great movie, but it just has a lot of setup.
So I wondered if you'd pick The Fellowship, because The Fellowship is my favorite movie.
That's so funny.
I love the fact that we open in the Shire. Shire scenes are my favorite.
I do see the draw of that.
And I also like the expanse of the different types of scenery we get. We start in the Shire, we go through some marshes, we get to Rivendell, we see mountains and caves, we see Lothlorien, we see a river. There's just so many different types of scenery that it's always fresh to me. And your comment about there not being a battle, well, Fellowship has my favorite battle too, which is the battle at Balin's Tomb.
I remember you mentioning that was your favorite because you see the whole Fellowship fighting, right?
Yep, it's just such teamwork. I love it. So, Fellowship hands down is my favorite.
Like I said, it's hard picking between them. It's funny we agree that the last movie, Return of the King, is number 2.
Yep. So, earlier in our podcast, I mentioned that if I could change one thing about the movies, it would be to omit Sam's line to Galadriel about wanting one of those nice shiny daggers. What is one thing that you would change about the movies if you could?
Oh, man. Not writing the books, this feels like you're almost asking me to make my own adaptation, kind of.
What didn't work for you in the movies?
After our discussion, I think it's from my favorite one, but the argument with Gandalf and Theoden about Helm's Deep just needs to go. That, especially knowing it wasn't in the books. But even without that, it felt odd and out of place. Even before we discussed it, I felt like, what is going on here? It ruined the whole pacing of an otherwise great movie.
That would be another thing I would want to see go as well. I agree with you on this one.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of other things that kind of broke up the pacing, but those were at least fun and good, but it was just really frustrating and annoying and didn't do anything. So where are we headed in the podcast from here?
Next, we're going to take a look at the Hobbit movies. I'm hoping that we'll be able to do one episode per each of the Hobbit movies. So there's 3 Hobbit movies. I'm looking at 3 episodes covering those. We're going to be watching the extended Hobbit movies. Then we'll have another one of these segments when we wrap up that 3rd Hobbit movie.
All right. I'm excited to see the Hobbit movies because I have, like I said, read the books so long ago. I think I've heard that there's a lot of derisions and differences more so than even Lord of the Rings. Is that correct?
There's so many changes made that I cannot list them.
Yeah. So maybe that's one thing I'm worried because how long I read the books is like how much I'll be like, did that happen? I just have to kind of forget about the books, I feel like, going into these movies, especially with how old it is.
Don't think about the Hobbit book.
Especially with how old my reading of it is, I definitely will be pushing any thought of it to the back of my mind.
I would recommend you try to approach the movies as their own work and try to think about what works and doesn't work for you in the Hobbit movies with the story that those movies are telling.
Okay. I can certainly do that. It's not a problem. Like I said, I read it once a long time ago. It stuck with me, but it's not fresh in my head by any means.
Mm-hmm. So next, we have Language, Lore, and Letters. We read the essay by J.R.R. Tolkien called Beowulf, the Monsters, and the Critics. There'll be a link to it in the description of the podcast if you guys would like to read it yourselves. This is a scholarly essay that Tolkien wrote about Beowulf. Tolkien is largely responsible for the literary recognition Beowulf receives today. In his day, it was mostly seen as a historical source, not literature or art. Some of the themes he identifies in Beowulf and the methods he uses to analyze it show up in the legendarium and may be relevant to how we analyze stories ourselves.
I did think as I was reading this, it was quite interesting that he kept saying that people were deriding Beowulf because, I mean, I don't have a wide breadth of reading academic works on Beowulf, but I thought it was well received. But I know that this was written nearly 100 years ago.
Exactly. The reason Beowulf is well received today is because of Tolkien.
Yeah. I was kind of putting together that at least the consensus has changed, but if it was Tolkien, that's even more interesting.
In this essay, Tolkien constructs a parable. A man builds a tower out of stones which were once used in an old hall. Others observed that the stones were old, and without actually using the tower to find out its purpose, tore it down to see if the stones had inscriptions. Some even tried to mine for coal under the tower. Then these people were puzzled at the apparent oddity of the builder, since they did not understand that he built the tower to look at the sea. When I was reading through this parable, when I got to the part about the coal, it instantly made me think of industrialization.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, that did hit me. I did think also with his metaphor, it meant they just started looking for stuff that nobody at all was mentioning. They just kind of got so completely sidetracked and were digging. I think a more modern or contemporary, we were digging for gold, like just completely lost track of the analysis on Beowulf is what that specific digging for coal meant, in my understanding of his metaphor or parable.
What I got out of it was that when you started looking for coal under the tower, it had absolutely nothing to do with the art that was being made, whether for purpose or for inscriptions. Like the people who tore the tower apart looking for some meaning behind the stones, even though they were wrong and it wasn't there, and they destroyed the art to try to find it, they were still looking for purpose.
Right.
The people who were just trying to dig up coal were destroying art for industrialization. Like, they weren't even trying to do something good with it.
Right. I don't know. For me, I just thought it was like in his time, like somebody wrote like, "What does Beowulf say about the history of some like Italy or something?" And it's like absolutely nothing. It's just kind of what he meant. Like people are just digging in like a completely random direction with no hint at it. I feel like maybe we're kind of saying the same thing.
Mm-hmm. It works because, we can read the same parable and come away with different applications to it, and that's fine. Tolkien applies this parable to the critics of Beowulf who would topple the tower of the poetry in Beowulf without considering its art in the hopes of finding the history which came before it. So trying to triangulate, say, what an Old English feast might look like based on Beowulf, say, or, just as an example.
I really liked the parable. It's a good metaphor for overanalyzing, especially I feel like people do this with older pieces of work, like pieces of art, literature, and also visual mediums, but like breaking down the elements so much that is not even a coherent picture anymore. It's a great metaphor for that.
I think that this can also apply to those who find more interest in pointing out historical influences on Tolkien's writing than enjoying the mythos for what it is. I'm not trying to attack you, JD.
I'm a little guilty on that. Yeah, I'll take the licks for that. I mean, I do enjoy doing that, but I still enjoy it as a tower as well. And I don't want to actually deconstruct. That's the fun thing about analysis is you can put it back together without actually having to rebuild the tower, right? Like the tower's still there even if you break it apart because it's just it's all ideas.
Exactly. This is my next point. That I note that the parable breaks down in that those who destroy the tower for the sake of looking for inscriptions have made the original work cease to exist in their examination of it. Those who would mine Beowulf or the Legendarium for historical meaning do not take anything away from themselves or anyone else. I believe it is possible for there to be meaningful patterns in art of which the artist is unaware. So, maybe there are inscriptions on some of the stones that the farmer in the parable didn't realize that are actually valuable to find. Especially since in literature we're not actually destroying the tower. Why not look for some of them? It can be fun. Later in the essay, Tolkien summarizes some themes of Beowulf and admits that the author would not have identified the themes that way, and the work would have been poorer if he had been aware of them. That doesn't mean those themes are any less present just because the author didn't know it.
Yeah. The only thing I can say is there's the opportunity cost when you break down an analysis that much and you go that much into it. It's kind of just wasted time. But like you said, only for themselves. You said they're not even if they're enjoying it, then they're not even wasting their own time. It's only when you feel like following a tread and overanalyzing, and it's so broken down that it stops making sense to yourself, and it's just a frustrating, confusing mess. It's because you've broken it down too much.
But then you can just, put it on the shelf for a couple months and come back to it and it'll be fresh.
Yeah, exactly. We're not destroying actual towers here because I feel like, honestly, our whole podcast is kind of deconstructing Lord of the Rings. We haven't gotten to Tolkien's direct works yet, but we're going kind of blow by blow on these scenes and analyzing them, right?
But hopefully we'll be enjoying the mythos for its own sake as well.
Yeah, definitely. I am.
I know I will be. So some of the things that Tolkien talks about in this essay, Tolkien identifies qualities of an old hero. He says that one of the qualities is being caught in the chains of circumstance or own character, torn between duties equally sacred and dying with back to the wall.
That's interesting when you think about Lord of the Rings. His work, his writing in this work, and then apply that to his characters he wrote.
I'm especially interested in the torn between duties equally sacred part myself.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like torn between duties equally sacred. Like, I don't know, change of circumstance caught me because that's what really, when I was watching Lord of the Rings, I felt so bad for Frodo.
That's what I thought about when I read Chains of Circumstance, was your comment about Gandalf roping Frodo into this.
Yeah. I mean, I get it's not really Gandalf, but I don't know, man. I felt bad for Frodo watching this movie. That's all I could say.
Yeah, well, I would say Frodo's a great example of the Chains of Circumstance. I think Aragorn choosing between going to Minas Tirith and following Merry and Pippin at the end of Fellowship in the movie is a good example of torn between duties equally sacred.
I was wondering what you meant exactly between, because I was thinking about Frodo even between whenever he said duty. I was like, well, it's Frodo. Like, I was just thinking Frodo, but he didn't really have any other choice. He only had one choice.
Yeah,
which is like saying you have no choice, really.
Well, I think Aragorn models a lot of the torn between duties equally sacred.
Right.
And dying with back to the wall. I think a good example in the movies of that would be the death charge of the Rohirrim.
Yeah, I mean, that was a great scene. I'm going to go watch it when I get home, I think. It was really good.
Tolkien identifies another theme that he calls northern courage. The stubbornness to fight for the right side even in the face of certain defeat. When hope fails, northern courage can suffice.
I feel like it's important to note he's comparing this to Greek myth, which would be that's why I think the northern's so important instead of him just the theme being courage. It's like it's as opposed to like the other myths that are, at least in his time, were more traditionally part of like when you're learning about mythology.
Right. Greek and Roman myth had a lot of respect, whereas the Germanic mythos, the Norse myths, things like that, didn't have that respect because they weren't Greek and Roman. And Tolkien identifies this northern courage across really all of the Germanic mythology, not just Beowulf, but it can also be seen in the Norse myths and the sagas, where it doesn't really matter that you know you're going to lose. You go out fighting anyway. And
that's it reminds me a lot of Gimli being excited to go to the Black Gate. There's a hint of sarcasm, but he did it. You know, he went there, even though he said it was certain defeat.
Certainty of death, small chance of success. What are we waiting for?
That's exactly when I was reading about the stubbornness and northern courage. I kept thinking of that. I mean, the entire Battle of the Black Gate, but Gimli in particular. That quote. Yep.
I think that's a great example. We mentioned Ragnarok earlier. That's another example that Odin knows that he's going to die at Ragnarok, but that doesn't stop him from spending his entire life trying to fight that.
You know, the purpose of those shows, there's a ton of shows, movies, and books that use the self-fulfilling prophecy or prophecy coming true and people trying to avoid it. It's often makes the prophecy come true. I feel like this is like a reaction to that natural fear of prophecy, and it's more like this society said, no, just do what you need to do what you would do what the prophecy says even, but do it the best you can, and things will work out for the best. Even if you're doomed or in the modern sense, if you're fated to fail, you'll fail in the best way for yourself.
Yep. And self-fulfilling prophecies is a big theme in Norse myth as well. So there was a couple really good quotes in this essay that I really liked. One was, "The monsters do not depart, whether the gods go or come." What I get out of this is that stories like Beowulf or Lord of the Rings appeal to us regardless of religious affiliation. There is something fundamentally human about these fantasy stories.
Yeah, and using Beowulf as an example of this was really great. And he goes into the essay. I'm not connecting this at all. This is Tolkien doing the work, but like, Grendel was in Beowulf before Christianity and after, and they made it applicable to their society by making him like the son of Cain, like, for example. But I don't know, Grendel's a really good monster, like even without the religious connotations that were put on once Christendom was established in England.
It's a great example of how we make the story what it is by ourselves. We are not directly interacting with the author. We are interacting with something the author has created that takes on a life of its own. Another really good quote from the essay that I liked was, "The wages of heroism is death." What I get out of this is that heroes die and all things pass. There's a fixture of grief in this type of story. We can see this in Frodo's PTSD.
I feel like he didn't put this as much in Lord of the Rings. 8 of the 9, if I'm counting right, Fellowship members make it. It's not the same as like a doomed thing. In the end, everybody kind of makes it in a way. I mean, physically at least, for the most part. I do like your comparison there with like Frodo. You know, even though he didn't die in the process of destroying the rings, he lost a part of himself. There's still the fixture of grief, like you said.
I think you could argue that the part of Frodo that makes Frodo has died in the course of the story.
That is true. Yeah, a very good way of putting it. His body lives on, but he's so changed that they may as well have a funeral for the one he was before. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. So there's a pattern I detect in this essay. The critic says the work fails at some point X. Tolkien then asks, was the work meant to do X? What if it weren't meant to do X? Is there a beauty in the artwork if we understand it on its own merits? I believe this way of understanding art, literature, movies, or TV shows, I'm looking at you, Rings of Power, is the most likely to render a work pleasing and enjoyable.
That's kind of what we've been doing with our generous takes in a way.
Exactly. That's exactly where I was going to go with this. That generous takes are exactly what I think Tolkien is talking about in this Beowulf essay.
Right. Actually, the way he puts it is more interesting. It's I feel like it's maybe easier to do with surviving historical literature, but like, what were they going for? Sometimes in modern, they make so much media in the modern day that sometimes it's hard to tell what they were going for. They weren't going for very much of anything. I feel like it's easy to say for some things. I don't know about Rings of Power. I'm not commenting on that, but there are definitely like cash grab media produced and stuff like that don't have as much depth. I'm thinking of Michael Bay, the director of the Transformer movies. One time in an interview said, "Oh, so I like to make movies for 12-year-old kids who like explosions. Who cares?" And for me, I always hated his movies, but it really it's like, oh well, it's made for people younger than me. You know, it's not made for adult me. It was probably made for 10-year-old me, right?
Well, see, in order for a piece of work to be a cash grab, there has to be something in it that grabs cash.
Yeah, that people would pay attention to.
Art has always been made to make money.
Right. I feel like there are some real straight-to-DVD stinkers, though.
I mean, you can have bad art, but it's probably not grabbing a lot of cash then.
No, just enough to make the line go just above.
The things that really grab cash are good art.
That's true. I feel like when you broke down this pattern and I read this, it made me think about just how the critics are saying the work fails at X. It's because they're looking for that, right? And there's probably a story out there for them, or a story that they're comparing it to that they like more, as he said a lot. And it makes me think about like how, not just with stories and critics, but like with all things, people are looking for something and trying to force it into their life. It happens with people, with jobs, with like so many things, but it's like the world is like varied and unique enough that you have to understand whatever it is, in this case art, what you're looking at on its level and what it was made for. That you need to perceive it and not judge it by your standards. And that's exactly what you said, but it just like the way that it was broken down in this essay really hammered that idea home for me. And it's something like that's already a belief I had, but this is like a good illustration of that.
So with that, I think that wraps up our analysis of that essay.
Yes, this one was a lot denser than the other two language, lore, and letters, but it was still well worth the read.
I'm glad you thought so. I hope the audience thinks so too if they decide to read it. You can follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram through the links in the description. Please follow, like, and subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and other major podcast platforms. To have your question or comment featured on the podcast, please send an email to shirepost.ringsandthings@gmail.com.
If you're enjoying the podcast, please consider contributing to our efforts through the Patreon link in the description.
A hearty hobbity thank you to our first supporter, Lori J. from Florida. We are deeply grateful for your support.
And a special thank you to our editor and spiritual producer, Stephen Jeffrey. And thank you for listening.